Hello friends, hi. If this is your first time on my channel, you're most definitely welcome. If you're a returning subscriber, what's up, what's poppin', welcome back. So we have another pre-med playlist video, and today I'm going to be talking about the MCAT. MCAT is a very interesting exam, a very challenging one, very hard, but with the right mindset, the right tools, right resources, you are more than capable of doing well on it. So today I'm going to be talking to you guys about things to think about when studying for the MCAT, how I study for the MCAT, and just hoping to kind of get you guys to kickstart your MCAT studying journey. Let's get into the video. So the first thing I want to say about the MCAT is your mindset matters. And it is so important because as a pre-med and like especially closer to like senior year, when I was getting ready to actually start thinking about the MCAT more, everyone kept saying, oh, it's a devilish exam, it's like a terrible exam, it's so hard, it's, really challenging, all these things, right? And I'm not saying they're not lying, but when you just only hear these kind of things, you tend to start getting anxiety and getting very stressed out about an exam you don't even know about yet. So for me, I was always just kind of like, oh my goodness, this MCAT is like impending doom that I have to do. Like, how do I even study? Like, all that kind of stuff. And I really want you to start off by saying, I'm going to do well on the MCAT. Like, you have to start by saying, this is a challenging exam, but I am more than capable of doing well. And it wasn't until after I started studying for the MCAT that I had seen something, I think on like one of the pre-med Instagram pages, where it was like, the MCAT is an opportunity to show to medical schools how much you know and show that you're prepared and ready to start medical school. And when you think of it that way, I think the MCAT becomes a lot less daunting. It's more of like, okay, I am going to put my all into this to show them that I have mastered this material and I am ready for school. Your success on the MCAT does predict your success in the first 2 years of medical school. So a lot of schools, all schools, not a lot, all schools really do pay attention to your MCAT score. It's really important. You can't get away with like a bad MCAT score. That's the truth. And you want to take it seriously, take it once. Like, that is the best advice I can give you. Like, if you take your MCAT seriously the first time and you do everything you need to do, you only will have to take it once. That's not the case for everyone, but I do think that if you walk in with that mindset, you will set yourself up to only take it once, because it's an exam you really don't want to have to take multiple times. It's like, I remember my testing experience, which I should probably make a whole nother video on, because Lord knows I almost like lost my wig cap in the testing room. I was just, we'll talk about it in another video. The next thing I want to say is you want to tell yourself that studying for the MCAT is a marathon. Like, you have to work at it for a very long time. You don't just study the night before and think you're going to do well, or study for like a month and think you're going to do well. You have to be studying for months in advance. They say at least 350 hours of study time. I suggest more, but at least 350. The next thing you want to do is research the MCAT. That is super, super important, and something I wish I did a bit earlier on before like registering or before starting like my MCAT journey. Is I just wish I took the time to sit down, read about the MCAT, read what it tests, the structure of the MCAT, learn about the exam as its own, like not even trying to study, like just learn what it is, because it's super important. Because I think when you learn what the MCAT is, what it tests, when you know the MCAT in and out, it becomes a lot less intimidating to study for, because you know what's expected of you. You know that you're gonna get four sections, this many questions in each section, you have this much time, it's gonna test you for these kind of things. Like, that is the best. Like, it's so important. I wish I did that earlier on. I didn't start doing that until in the middle of my studying, which I think helped improve my score as I got closer to my test date, but I should have done that at the beginning. And I think part of my reluctance to study for the MCAT, or to begin studying for the MCAT, because I actually rescheduled my MCAT twice. So I had an MCAT date in August 2018, and with working full-time and working my summer RA job, it just wasn't feasible to study. So I canceled that one, and then I had, registered to take it in April, and by January, I realized I was not ready, so I had to reschedule it. And I hadn't been studying. I knew I was taking the MCAT in 2019, and I hadn't really seriously started studying until like end of December, January. That's when I really started like, okay, it's time to take this seriously. It's time to actually open the books and get into it. And I think part of it was just because the MCAT was so unfamiliar to me. So that's what just kind of kept me away from it for so long. And it's really important to talk to friends. And part of your research in the MCAT and what you need to do, talk to people who have taken it and done well. And also talk to people who have taken it and not done well too, because they will give you advice advise them to what they feel like contributed to their poor performance, and the people who did well or did okay will tell you, the things that they did, the things that they wish they did. So it's really important to talk to people. Like when I really got into like taking studying seriously in January, I had talked to, one of my profiles who's at USC, and then I talked to some other Stanford students who were now in medical school and did really well on their MCAT. And literally, I was telling them because I was freaking out because I had, I think, 8 weeks to my test date, and I was still feeling so overwhelmed. And I'm like, okay, let me talk to other people. And like from talking to them, that's when I realized that I should not take it in April and that I needed to push my test date back. So it's really important to talk to people because they'll be honest with you, they'll be realistic with you, and they will also tell you, they'll give you advice, right? Like I think across the board, all the students I was talking to were saying, it sounds like you're not ready to take it, so why would you just try to, all for the sake of taking it early, why would you try to take it, sooner rather than later, if you could do better when you take it later? So talk to people. The next thing I would say is you want to take a diagnostic test. After getting your mindset right, researching what the MCAT is about, you want to take a practice test to see where you stand. This is before you have started studying or whatever. Like you want to see, what do I actually know and how am I actually performing right now? And it's important because it will tell you, usually your diagnostic score will tell you that you are not ready to take the MCAT and you have a lot to study for. I think very few people will do decent on their very first MCAT. So I remember taking the very first mock MCAT I took, I think it was my junior year, and like Stanford offers like mock MCAT prep where they'll like let you take one of the AMC's like full length tests. And I took it and I remember I got like a 490, did I get a 493 or 498 or something like that, right? And y'all, this is why it's so important to research, because I did something stupid. So when I got the score back, I was like, oh, okay, not bad. I got a 498 out of like what, 520? I was like, that's not bad at all. And I went on Snapchat and posted that score talking about, yes, 490 something out of 520. Y'all, any score below a 500 is not a good score. It is not a good score. I think 500, you're kind of close, but like anything below a 500 is not a good score at all. And I went on the internet posting, talking about, wow, look at this on my first. Y'all, that was a terrible score, right? And because I didn't know the MCAT, I didn't understand the scoring, I didn't understand what scores mean what, I thought that was a okay score. So then I remember the next time I seriously took a diagnostic test as to like, okay, I'm starting to study, I think I got a 496. And from seeing that, I was like, I have a long way to go. And it's important to know that because you will see the breakdown of, okay, what sections are worse for me. And for me, the section that was the worst was chemistry and physics, which makes sense because A, I did not do well in general chemistry, as you guys all know, and then B, I hadn't finished physics. I was like currently actively taking physics at that time. So that was like my worst section. And like when you take the diagnostic score, you know where your strengths and weaknesses are, so you know where to start studying. So it's important to have a baseline starting score. So after you have a baseline score and you know where your strengths and weaknesses are, you want to create a study plan. That is super important. You can't just like pick up a book and randomly study for the MCAT one day. You have to have a plan and know what you're accomplishing every week, every month, every day, every hour, all that kind of stuff. So I would suggest a study plan from anywhere from 3 to 6 months. If you are someone who did not do well in your pre-med classes, I would increase how long you study for, because if you didn't do well in your pre-med classes, that means you did not master the material in the first place. And you need to at least have mastered your pre-med classes to fully be in a better position to take the MCAT. And as you guys know, I didn't do well in general chemistry. General biology was where I was kind of like shifting into the good grade section, but like I struggled there. Like I said, I hadn't finished taking physics, so I knew those were my weak points, and like I knew that I had a lot of material that I had to go back and learn because I never learned in the first place. A lot of material that I never understood in the first place. So that adds time. That adds time to your study plan. So for me, I believe I studied for about 4.5 months. I studied for about 4.5 months. That was because, I knew I didn't do well in some classes, but I also did well in a decent amount of classes too, right? I didn't do well in general chemistry, but physics, so far I had been doing well in my class. I had gotten a B+ the first quarter and then A the next quarter, right? Biochem, I had gotten A's, organic chemistry, B and A, bio from C to B, and human physiology. I took human physiology my senior year and I had gotten an A in that class. So like for me, I knew that I had a solid foundation in certain areas, right? Which is why the biochem was probably one of my had better sections on my diagnostic score. So, you know, having that information, I was able to create a study plan, and I would strongly suggest, and I didn't do this, or I strayed away from this initially, you have to study the stuff you don't know first. For me, I knew general chemistry was so hard because one, I did not do well in the class, and I never really learned the material. So everything general chemistry to me was just like, it went over my head, and I was so afraid of it, so I never really studied it. I would always try to study the bio stuff or do a bit of like, you know, psych and sociology, do anything but chemistry, because like I was so afraid of it, and like I knew I didn't do well, and you do not want to do that. You want to tackle your weaknesses immediately. You want to start with them. Start with them. So in your study plan, you want to say, okay, I know I didn't do well in chemistry, so I really need to like strategize my study plan where I am able to put in and force myself to go over these materials. While you're creating a study plan, you want to make sure you actually have the bandwidth to study for the MCAT. Like I had mentioned earlier, when I initially registered to take the MCAT in August, I did that because I'm like, oh, okay, the MCAT is the next step of what I need to do, and like in my pre-med journey, right? Without seriously considering, well, what am I doing at this time, and do I have the bandwidth to study? If you are not able to commit time to study, you need to have a longer study plan. So for example, if you know you are like working, going to school full time, right? You may only be able to study maybe for 2 to 3 hours a day. And if you do that, that means you definitely need to study for longer versus someone who is studying full time. Literally, they're not working and they can be in the library for 8 hours a day studying. Like for them, someone like that, they may only need 2 to 3 months to study because they're literally studying full time, right? For me, when I was studying for the MCAT, I was going to school, I was working full time, right? So I really had to find time to put into study, right? I had to make my study plan that fit with, okay, from 8 to 4:30, I'm at work, from 4:30 to 10, I'm at school, and then, you know, really being able to figure that out, right? So one thing I would do is the days I didn't go to school, I would stay at work late for like 4 to 5 hours, sometimes 6, to study. Literally just sit in my office studying. And I had to balance that with also studying for school as well. And the way I kind of told myself, the one thing that I think helped was I told myself that me studying physics and studying for schools is still helping me study for the MCAT, because I still need this content for the MCAT. So there would be days that were like physics days and days that were MCAT days, right? It really all depended on my priorities. So the days I went to school, I didn't really study for the MCAT on those days, to be honest, because I knew I either had readings to do, practice problems to do for class, or like I had to read my pre-lab, you know, and make sure that I knew what was happening that day for lab. So on those days, I didn't study. So every other day that I wasn't in school, I was doing MCAT studying. The next thing I'm going to talk about is resources to study. So anyone who knows me knows I am Seun the scammer. I love getting things for free, and I love like not paying for things. Like I really try to find ways to be strategic and ways to get things without having to pay for it, right? And I believe that the MCAT is something you can study for with minimal cost. I truly do think that there are people who spend thousands of dollars to take prep courses or whatever. Different things work for different people, but I'm a firm believer that you can gather the resources you need and study for the MCAT for as minimal cost as possible. Will it be completely free? I can't tell you that. That depends on you, your situation, and like your environment. But I think there's ways to do it for, you know, for cheaper. So for example, like I definitely know I had to get the Kaplan books, but I had used my scholarship money to pay for them. So technically speaking, I didn't pay for them. My scholarship did, but I had to get MCAT books, and I definitely think that that's something you'll think about paying for. You definitely want some books, or if you can get them from a friend who's no longer studying for the MCAT anymore. Khan Academy has a lot of videos specifically for the MCAT, so you really want to use them because they're free videos and they go over topics that may be addressed on the MCAT. I definitely think you will have to choose like a testing prep company in terms of getting practice problems. I remember when I was studying for the MCAT, my human physiology teacher, he teaches a class, but he's also a medical doctor at the medical school, and he told me you need to do at least 2,000 questions. And when he first told me that, I was like, that sounds like a lot of questions. But y'all, at this point in my life, for the MCAT, I've done more than 2,000 questions. And the best way to improve on MCAT is through practice. There's no amount of reading a section of your Kaplan book that will make it stick. You have to practice it, which is why I say immediately after you go over a chapter or a topic, quiz yourself. Take a quiz and see how well you do, right? And make sure that you are catching things that you don't know. And I think some really important resources, something I really liked that I used Kaplan's question bank, and I really liked it because it allows you to pick, so it falls in line with their Kaplan, their prep books too. So I guess you would need their books. You don't need them, but like it would be helpful to have their books. And you can pick by like topic and create your own like quiz. So for example, if I knew I had just gone over the skin, like if that was what I studied that day, I can select the topic of like the skin as an organ, and it would only give me questions regarding that. So that way I was only being tested on what I had just learned, right? Or if I had just done, pH, I would pick all topics related to like pH, chemistry, like all that kind of balance, right? And like take quizzes on that, and then I'm able to see how I did, and then they are able to explain to you what the correct answer was, how you have gone to it. I think Kaplan question bank is really, really helpful as a pre-AAMC material stuff, just because you get a lot of practice, and Kaplan tends, I think of all the test preps, they have a bit more harder questions, which I think can benefit you, right? Because if you learn how to master hard questions, then transitioning to the MCAT is a lot easier, because study with all Kaplan stuff, and that's what I use for full lengths, and their exams are hard, y'all. They're so hard, right? And when I transitioned into using AAMC material, I was like, wow, these questions are not as bad as the Kaplan ones. So I kind of felt a bit better when I was taking my full lengths on AAMC's website. I've heard that Next Step is the closest, mimics the MCAT best in terms of the way they ask questions and the content. Like it's the closest to the MCAT. And Kaplan's like the furthest away. It is what it is. It doesn't matter, because either way I got a score and I got in. So whether I use Kaplan, whether I use Next Step, you do whatever works for you. When you are getting closer to your test date, that's when you want to buy AAMC materials. So they offer like question banks, they offer full-length practice exams as well. I would say about 6 weeks to your test date, that's when you want to start using that material. So when I think at the 6-week mark to my test date, that's when I started using their biology question banks, their chemistry question banks. Literally all materials I had. But that's also because I had gotten the Kaplan course, but I didn't pay for the course, y'all. Remember, I told you, I'm always trying to finesse. I didn't pay for this Kaplan course, so I was blessed to have the Kaplan course, and that gave me access to the question bank. It gave me access. When you buy the Kaplan course prep, they also give you access to the AAMC, all the AAMC like practice materials and stuff. And Kaplan themselves have videos as well that sometimes I used. It really all depends. They did have the like live sessions that went on with it. I wasn't as dedicated to live sessions. I didn't go as often, nor did I find them as helpful, just because for me, a lot of studying for the MCAT was me learning the material for the first time, right? And it wasn't necessarily review for me for some of the stuff. And I feel like the Kaplan prep course with the teacher or whatever is more of like, there's this expectation that you kind of already know the material, and this is literally like review for you, like review and like how to test take. And so I didn't find the videos helpful, so I stopped going to the actual class part and just used their practice problems and their materials, just because I felt like I wasn't at that level, the class being productive for me. So I didn't do that, but that's something to think about. The last thing I want to talk about is rescheduling your MCAT and really being able to tell whether you are ready to take it or not. As I mentioned, I had rescheduled twice. The first time was because I didn't study at all. The second time was because I just felt like with the time I had left, I hadn't reviewed enough that made me feel like I can take this exam and feel like I would do well. Rescheduling costs money, let me say that. So you definitely want to be sure, and in part of creating a plan, you want to know roughly when you want to take the MCAT, right? Like I had taken the MCAT very close to the time it was time for me to apply to medical school, which I do not recommend. I took my MCAT in May. A May test date means you don't get your score back until end of June, or for me it was the end of June. And by the end of June, you should have, if you're applying early, you should have already applied, right? So for me, because I had rescheduled from April to May, I knew I couldn't do a June date, so I had to like do May. And I ended up applying to medical school before I got my score back, which I will never recommend, which is why it's so important to plan strategically. know that, okay, if I want to apply this cycle, I should take the MCAT this. You want to give yourself time to retake the exam if you have to, right? Because sometimes things happen, the exam doesn't go the way you want it to, and you know, you have to retake, and you want to give yourself enough time to do that. So like me, taking it literally right before the application cycle opens didn't really leave opportunity for me to retake it, which I actually rescheduled to retake it because my testing experience was really bad, and I ended up not retaking it. But I like had scheduled a date in July, which is like in the middle of the cycle, and like July date you don't get your score back until August, which puts your application on hold because medical schools will not review your application until you have all scores. So you really want to make sure that you plan accordingly and you pick a test date that aligns with when you're applying and gives you time to get your score back and restudy if you need to. It's super important, and that's like, if there's one thing I will never recommend, do not apply to medical school without knowing your score, which I did. God is good. I was lucky. I was blessed. I wasn't lucky. I was blessed, and it ended up being a score good enough to apply with. Imagine if it was a score that was mediocre. So that's all I have today for the MCAT. I'll probably make another video because I feel like there's so much about the MCAT that cannot just be covered in one video, and you guys know I try to keep my videos under 20 minutes. So I'll probably like make another video of like literally maybe more so about my testing experience that might be useful to talk about. So I will see you guys in another video. Be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe to my channel.